AI risk, part 3. We look at frameworks and standards in AI risk management. Frameworks. They sound like paperwork, but in truth, they are the architectural blueprints of trust. Without them, AI governance collapses into chaos. In this part, let's decode why frameworks matter, how they click together, and how they form the operating system for AI assurance across engineering, ethics, and enterprise control. AI risk is no longer theoretical, it's lived every day in credit scoring models, in recommendation engines, in automated decisions that affect livelihoods. And yet, many organizations still approach AI risk in isolation as if ethics, security, and compliance can be managed separately. Frameworks solve this fragmentation. They give us three things: a common language, so everyone from a data scientist to a director speaks the same vocabulary of governance. Assurance evidence is the next. This is so we can prove that AI systems are safe, fair, and accountable. The third is operating cadence. This is so AI risk management doesn't stop after a policy is written, it runs as a loop. That's the beauty of a framework. They transform good intention into repeatable, auditable habit. Think of framework as a musical score and each governance instrument as one of the players. Policies, controls, testings, audit. A single violin can make music, but a framework turns it into a symphony. Framework aren't checklists. They are meta systems that orchestrate how policies, roles, tools, and controls come together. The real question isn't which framework you use, it's how you make them work together. At the top of the layer, we have value and governance framework like ISO 42001 and EU AI Act, which define why AI must be governed and who is accountable. The middle layer is risk and assurance framework like the NIST AI RMF or ISO 23894, which defines how to identify, measure, and mitigate AI risk. The bottom layer is sectoral and regulatory overlays, like the SR 117 for model risk in banking, or MAS TRM for technology risk, or internal audit guidelines which define what evidence you must produce and how often you prove your compliances. Together, they form a stacked architecture of trust, from ethics to engineering, from policy to proof. Let's start with the NIST AI risk management framework, probably the most pragmatic of the bunch. NIST breaks AI risk into continuous loop, which is govern, map, measure, manage, and govern again. The loop continues. It's not a one time compliance event, it's a living feedback cycle. Govern sets the tone, the policies, the role, the accountability. Map identifies what could go wrong, like data biases, misuse, or opacity. Measure tests the risk quantitatively using metrics, fairness score, drift dashboards. And manage, it turns those insights into corrective actions, controls, and learning loops. Each phase feeds the next. ensuring that AI risk management becomes dynamic assurance and not static documentation. Now, if NIST AI RMF is about assurance in motion, ISO 42001 is about assurance you can audit. 42001 defines AI management systems, just like ISO 27000 does for information security. It focuses on documentation, accountability, and continual improvement. It asks for, have you defined your AI policy? Do you have a responsible AI officer? Can you show risk register, model logs, data lineage, and governance minutes? The goal isn't paperwork for the sake of it, it's evidence that accountability exists. In the coming year, ISO 42001 certification will be a global benchmark for proving AI governance maturity, especially in regulated sectors like banking and healthcare. Then comes the legal heavyweight, the EU Act. It introduces the concept of high risk AI systems, credit scoring, medical device, recruitment tools, critical infrastructure, where failure has real human consequence. For these, compliance isn't optional. Organizations must maintain technical documentation linking design to risk controls, biases, and accuracy testing records. Organization must maintain human in the loop evidence or logging and traceability of all decisions and a confirmative assessment verified either internally or by a notified body. In short, the Act operationalizes accountability by design. Auditors will not ask, do you have a policy? They will ask, show me the evidence that your model lives by that policy. Two other frameworks deepen the credit or the risk craft itself. ISO 23894 is a bridge between the traditional enterprise risk management and AI. It introduces structured methods for identifying, assessing, and documenting AI specific uncertainty. SR 117, familiar to anyone in banking, defines model risk management, governance, validation, and independent reviews. These two together teach us a powerful lesson. AI risk isn't new, it's model risk at scale and speed. The control we learned in finance, which is independent validation, back testing, challenges model, are now reborn in the age of AI. But framework don't work in isolation. They crosswalk. For instance, NIST govern, map, measure, manage aligns neatly with ISO 42001 Plan, Do, Check Act. EU AI Act compliance maps ISO 23894 risk management to SR 11 validation standards. Building a crosswalk means aligning requirements so that one control can satisfy multiple frameworks. That's efficiency. One piece of evidence, many purpose. So, what does a framework complete AI risk management program actually look like? Well, at minimum, you should have an AI use case inventory, knowing what's deployed and where. Next, a AI risk assessment log with identified harms and mitigation plans, a model card and a data sheet documenting lineage, purpose, and performance. You need to have bias and explainability reports to show fairness and transparency. You also need to have governance minutes and audit trails, which shows the evidence of human oversight, and a continuous monitoring dashboard. Because risk doesn't stop for lunch or after lunch. That's your minimal evidence spine, the backbone of trustworthy AI. So, governance isn't just about committees, it's about flow. Effective design means every level has a clear role. The board owns the AI risk appetite and ethics charter. The CRO, the CISO owns policies, framework, and oversight. The data science team owns the model control, the testing, and the documentation. And internal audit verifies the entire chain independently. This separation of duty is what prevents blind spots. Institutional design itself becomes a safety feature, one we talked about earlier. All frameworks evolve along a maturity path from reactive to stewardship. Level 1 is ad hoc, risks discovered after an incident. Level 2 is defined, where policy exists but are not enforced as yet or completely. Third is integrated, wherein risk life cycle embeds in the MLOps. At level 4, it's assured, it's evidence based oversight. The final level is cultural, wherein AI risk becomes instinctive across the enterprise. The goal isn't to be perfect, it's to keep progressing through each levels deliberately. In banking, financial services, and insurance, scrutiny goes even deeper. Regulators expect alignment with SR11, RBI, MAS TRM, and emerging AI governance guidance. Key add-ons include independent model validation, reproducibility of result, transparent audit trails, explainability across demographic groups, and documented challenge logs for human oversight. In BFSI segment, AI governance isn't an innovation issue. It's a license to operate issue. Frameworks are powerful, but only when they are lived, not laminated. The real goal is to make governance invisible, built into the workflow of data science, risk review, and decisioning. When compliance becomes culture and assurance becomes automation, you know your AI program has matured. Remember, frameworks are not bureaucracy, they are the grammar of trust. Audits are not punishments, they are mirrors of accountability. And governance isn't a burden, it's the infrastructure of credibility. From paper to practice, that's where responsible AI truly begins. So, in the next chapter, we will explore how this framework comes live through real world case studies in banking, healthcare, public sector, where AI risk meets operational realities. Until then, remember this: frameworks don't slow innovation, they give it a conscious. Welcome to this part. This is your host, Savit Vittal Salian. Namaskar. Let's start the journey. Why frameworks matter? AI risk isn't one discipline, it's a junction of safety engineering, governance, security, ethics, and regulations. Frameworks provide common language. So, risk, data, legal, and engineering can align. Frameworks provide assurance evidence, which is what to document and show to auditors when asked for. Frameworks provide operating cadence, that is, who does what, when, and how rigorously. So, AI risk isn't one discipline, It's a junction of safety engineering, governance, security, ethics, and regulations. So, what does this mean? It means AI risk management doesn't belong to a single department or profession. It sits at the intersection of many. To manage AI risk properly, you need to combine the technical rigor of engineers, the rules and structure of governance, the defensive mindset of security, the moral compass of ethics, and the accountability framework of regulations. No one field alone can keep AI safe. It's the fusion of all these perspectives that creates a trustworthy AI. Why this is true? Well, AI systems are unlike traditional software. They learn, evolve, and adapt. So, their behavior isn't always predictable. The AI systems operate in real world context, influencing people, decisions, and systems. The AI systems, they are regulated globally and not just internally. So, technical safety alone isn't enough. You need a multidisciplinary shield. So, why framework matters? Well, a framework gives everyone in an organization a shared way to think, talk, and act about risk. It helps in three ways primarily. It creates a common language, so everyone understands risks the same way. It helps in to define assurance evidence, so you can prove what's been done is safe and compliant. It sets an operating cadence, a regular rhythm of reviewing, updating, and improving the control. Now, without a framework, teams speak different dialect of risk, leading to confusions and gap. Use a common language. Frameworks define consistent terms, roles, and definitions. Everyone from engineers to board members can talk about AI risk using the same vocabulary. Example, when you say biases, risk owner, or model drift, everyone knows exactly what that means because the framework has defined it already. It's like using a common map legend. If everyone uses the same symbols, no one get lost. Framework matters from an assurance evidence perspective. Framework defines what proof you must show that the controls are working to prove a point. The NIST AI RMF or ISO 42001 requires you to maintain a model card, to maintain audit trails, to have risk assessments and monitoring logs. These serve as assurance evidence and proof that your AI systems are not only compliant but verifiably trustworthy. It's like an exam. The framework is the syllabus, and your evidence is your answer sheet. From an operating cadence perspective, framework sets the rhythm and routine for AI governance. Defines how often to test the model, when to review the risk, who approves the deployment, and when audits can occur or should occur. Example, a framework may require quarterly AI risk reviews annual retraining validation, or monthly bias checks. It's like a metronome for governance, keeping everyone in sync and on tempo. So, why framework matters in AI risk management? Well, without framework, as an example, without framework, teams use different definition of risk. But with framework, everyone shares one structured vocabulary. Without framework, controls are ad hoc. With framework, controls are documented and auditable. Without framework, oversight is inconsistent. But with frameworks, reviews happen at predictable intervals. Without frameworks, it's hard to show compliance. With framework, you have clear evidence trail to show. Without framework, governance feels chaotic. But with frameworks, governance runs with rhythm and accountability. Framework turns chaos into coherence, aligning people, process, and proof. From a NIST AI RMF in action perspective, from a common language feature, it is where you define, govern, map, measure, manage. So all teams use the same terminology. From an assurance evidence perspective, you list the documentation required for audit. From an operating cadence perspective, you recommended periodic reviews and continuous monitoring loops. These are the practical effects on the ground. The result, a living system of governance is there that keeps the AI explainable, countable, and auditable. A framework is like the playbook of a sports team. Same play, calls, and signal. That's a common language. From an insurance evidence perspective, you match statistics and replays that prove what worked. From an operating cadence perspective, you have weekly practices, halftime reviews, and post game analysis. These are examples from a sports team perspective. Without that structure, even the best player end up out of sync. Framework turns good intention into repeatable practice by unifying language, proof, and rhythm. So why framework matter again? When you apply a framework like ISO 42001 or NIST AI RMF, everyone speaks the same governance language. Every control leaves auditable evidence, and every process follows a predictable life cycle. That's what makes framework not just paperwork but the heartbeat of accountability. Let's break down each discipline. Safety engineering. Well, it ensures AI works reliably and doesn't cause harm. Example, testing, fail safes, human overrides. Governance ensures decisions are structured, transparent, and accountable. Example, AI policies, oversight boards, and approvals. From security perspective, it protects data, models, and outcomes from misuse or attack. Example, model robustness, access control, adversarial testing. From ethics perspective, it ensures AI aligns with human values and fairness. Example, avoiding biases, respecting privacy, and protecting dignity. From regulation perspective, it ensures compliance with laws and global standards. Example, aligning to EU AI Act, DPDP Act, GDPR, or ISO 42001 as a name. Each field guards one layer of risk. Together, they form the AI assurance ecosystem. From an analogy perspective, think of AI risk like managing a smart city. Safety engineers build strong bridges. That's AI robustness. Governance sets traffic rules. That's AI policy. Security team guards against cyber attacks. That's AI misuse. Ethicists decide what's fair for citizens. That's AI fairnesses. Regulators enforce building codes. That's AI compliance. So you can't run a safe city with just one of them. It takes all to work together. Example, take AI model used for loan approvals in a bank. Test whether the model is accurate and reliable comes under safety engineering. Ensuring it's reviewed and approved by the AI ethics committee comes under governance. Protecting customer data and model integrity comes under security. Ensuring decisions don't discriminate by gender or race is ethics. And ensuring compliance with laws like the DPDP Act and RBI guidelines are regulations. So, if any one of these disciplines fails, the whole system's trust collapses. So, safety engineering perspective, without it, AI fails unpredictably. With it, reliable, testable systems are in place. Governance, without it, there is no clear accountability. But with governance, you have structured decision ownership. Models could get hacked or misused without security. With it, you have a protected and a resilient AI. Biased, unfair outcomes would be a norm without ethics. But with it, you have a human centered AI. Legal and reputational risk would always be a challenge without regulations aspect. With it, you will have compliance and trust around your systems and processes. Key takeaways. AI risk sits at the crossroad of technology, responsibility, and humanity. It's not a single road, it's a busy intersection where engineers, risk managers, lawyers, ethicists must all cooperate to prevent accidents. AI risk is not equal to one department's job. It's a shared by engineers, governance leaders, ethicists, regulators, and security experts. Collaboration, not isolation, and building safety. Managing AI risk means designing systems that are technically sound, ethically fair, legally compliant, and socially responsible. AI risk lives at the intersection of technology and trust. It's a team sport, not a solo act. Major frameworks. First is NIST AI Risk Management Framework. It's good for end to end risk thinking and how to run assurance as a loop. The course structure includes govern, mapping, measure, manage, plus playbook and profiles. The scope and audience are risk, security, and model owners. In this, the evidence is risk profile, having a risk register, a harm scenario, evaluation results, and having a continuous monitoring plan. Next is ISO 42001. It's good for making AI governance auditable and certifiable. In here, the typical evidence is having an AIMS policy, scope, role, competency training, procedures, having an internal audit, and management review. Its core structure includes plan, do, check, act across the AI lifecycle. The scope is organization wide management systems for AI. The next is the EU AI Act of 2024. It's good for what is legally required, especially for high risk models. It has a risk based tier. It could be prohibited category, high risk category, limited category, or minimal category. The scope here is legal obligations in the EU market. Artifacts in this includes risk management systems, data governance controls, technical documentation, logging evidence, showing there is a human oversight, post-market monitoring, and incident reporting. The next is the OECD AI principles. This is good for as a North Star values used for policy and public reporting. Provides a high level policy compass. It has 5 principles, which is beneficial, human centered, fairness, transparency, robustness. Plus, there are recommendations. In here, the typical artifacts would include principle mapping, impact assessments, and transparency reports. Moving on, we have the ISO 23894. This is good for deepening the risk methods using the ISO family. Here, the core structure is about identify, assess, threat, monitor in AI context. The scope is technical, provides a technical risk guidance. Evidence in this is the hazard list, the treatment plans, and monitoring metrics. The next is the SR11 ECB trim analogs. Scope is the BFSI model governance. It's good for bringing AI under the proven MRM discipline. The core structure has a model inventory, validation independence, and use test. Evidence here required would be model inventory, validation report, challenger models, limits and overrides. The next is the ISO 27001 or 27701 SOC 2 NIST SP 853. This is good for hardening data or model supply chains. Its structure has control catalogs or audits. Audience is security and privacy controls. Evidence here is the privacy ISMS scopes, access logs, key management, and DPIA or PIA. Then we have sectoral rules. Could be mass TRM or so on, GDPR or DPDP. This is jurisdiction based or industry specific. It's good for tailoring AI to sectoral compliances. The core structure is control expectations and reporting. And evidence here would be control mappings, testing evidence, and regulatory communication trails. So, how does the framework click together? Well, the OECD principle defines the why, legitimacy and social license. EU, AI, DPDP, GDPR defines the must, the obligation and the penalties associated with it. The ISO 42001 defines the how at an organizational level. It's about management systems and audits. The NIST AI RMF defines the how at the model risk level. First is the org level, now is the model level. Provides the risk loop and the profiles covering that. And the ISO 23894 or SR11 or ISO 27001 defines the how at the control level, the methods and evidence. If you pause here, the OECD is why. The EU is the must. And the how is defined by ISO 42001, NIST AI RMF, and the ISO 23894 and so on. But covers various aspects of it. So think of it as a zoning law. You have the OECD, EU Act. You have example a city administration is ISO 42001. Building codes is the NIST 23894. On safety inspection is your SR 11/7 or 27001. Let's look at the NIST AI RM running assurance as a loop. The functions and what to actually do. We have first establish AI risk policy rules defining owners, validator, risk officers. Provide a clear appetite on risk and documentation standards. That's the govern aspect. Next, for every AI use case, map the affected stakeholders, harms, context, and constraints, and classify the model risk. That's mapping. Then you go and evaluate biases, robustness, privacy leakage, jailbreak susceptibility, OD performances, uncertainty, record metrics and their thresholds. That's measuring aspect. Next is decide gating, the release policy, the pilot policy, and the blocking policy. Provide compensating control. Provide an incident response, clear trigger lines, and post market monitoring mechanisms. That's managing. What are the deliverables you would want? First is having a AI risk register and use case profile. Next is evaluation dossier, providing a fairness, robustness, privacy, and red teaming details. Monitor the SLO, providing the drift trigger or subgroup error limits. And you'll want to have a decision logs, who approved what and why. When we look at ISO 42001 making the governance auditable, what the auditor would expect from a policy and scope perspective of AI activities, roles and competency evidence training would be required to be provided. Next is operational procedures across the life cycle, from where the data was sourced, the labeling mechanism, the evaluation criteria, the deployment plans, process, monitoring aspect, and the decommissioning part. Internal audits and management review cadence or corrective action track. You require to provide that to the auditor. Interface to security, privacy, and risk management. How that was done is what the auditor would expect. What you win is your AI works if once all of these are in place and been provided, looks like a disciplined management system and not as a collection of pilots. So basically, the auditor would expect a clear, in summary, policy and scope of the activities, the role and competency evidence, operational procedure, internal audit and management reviews, the actions, corrective actions that you have taken, and the interface to the security and privacy, ISMS, and the risk management. The interface is critical. Moving on to the EU AI Act. What are the high risk obligations in practice? For high risk systems like creditworthiness, employment, essential services, they expect to have a in audit ready form. Well, the risk management system specific to the model has to be shown. From a data governance perspective, you need representativeness, bias analysis, provenance, consent, and legal basis. This should be all be audit ready. From a technical documentation, you need to have a clear model purpose, design choices, why such things were decided or decided on, metrics, and any limitations. From a logging and traceability perspective, you need the details of the prompts, the input and outputs, the decision logics, and the override mechanisms that is put in place. From transparency and user info perspective, you need to have a clear documentation on capabilities, limitations, human oversight instructions, just not saying we have it. What is the steps or instructions been provided? From an human oversight perspective, you need to have a clear fallback and override mechanism and a role training process in place. From a robustness, accuracy, and cyber security perspective, you need to have a clear evidence. From a post-market monitoring and incident reporting perspective, you need to have a clear workflow as to how the whole thing will flow. Now, you need to keep this conformity pack per model and with this item clearly indexed. It doubles as a model card for internal governance. You can take this as a screenshot. Look at your current AI model. Look at your current governance and see whether you have a conformity pack in place. If it is, then do look at the individual items as shown and see whether all of these are covered. If you don't have a conformity pack, this is a good starting point. This gives you a strong base when dealing with regulators or internal governance. From a senior management perspective, you need to ask your AI governance head to provide this to you so you have a top view about where things stand. Now let's look at the ISO 23894 or SR11. The ISO 23894 helps quantify and structure AI specific hazards and treatment options. The SR11 ECB trim brings independence and discipline, provides model inventory, materiality tiers, validation independence, challenger models, performance and use test. Combining them, it provides you a quantitative rigor and separation of duty, which is crucial for BFSI sector. Let's now look at how things tie together. From bias and fairness perspective, NIST states measure, that is bias metrics provides and manage thresholds. The EU AI Act says data governance, risk management, transparency. At ISO 42001 or 23894, it's about risk identification and treatment, competence and procedures. Whereas from SR11 perspective, it's about validation testing and challenger analysis. All of these map to biases and fairness aspect of AI risk. When it comes to explainability, NIST AI RMF states measure interpretability, govern disclosure policies. The EU AI Act states transparency to users and supervisors. From an ISO 42001 perspective, it says procedures for documentation and comms are required. From an SR 11 perspective, user test, explainability of decisions. All of these folds into one risk concern, which is explainability. The next risk concern would be robustness and drift. So let's look at what are the different aspects or the same thing spoken. How does it look like? So when the risk concern is about robustness and drift, NIST states measure the stress and manage the monitoring. EU AI Act says robustness and login monitoring is required. Post-market analysis is also required. At ISO 42001, it's about monitoring the KPIs and the corrective actions that you have taken. And from SR 11 perspective, ensure there is ongoing performance review and the limits and overrides are reviewed. That's from a robustness and drift perspective. When the risk concern is privacy, it's mapping the data flows and measuring the leakage from NIST perspective. It's about data governance and DPAI style analysis from EU perspective. From ISO 42001 perspective, it's about integrating ISO with ISO 27701. And from SR 11 perspective, it's data lineage in model inventory. So when the risk concern is security and measure, at NIST it is measure red team, jailbreaks and manage access. Measure and manage. At EU, it is having cyber safety control and incident reporting mechanism in place. At ISO 42001, it is linking ISO 27001 ISMS. At SR 11, it is about access control and change management. All of these fold into one risk concern, which is security and misuse. The last is the risk concern is from accountability perspective. In this, NIST says govern roles and risk appetite. EU says having an oversight, human oversight and conformity assessment. And ISO says having roles and competency defined and internal audits in place. Whereas SR 11 says having an independence in validation. All of these addresses the risk concerns or looks at a risk concern aspect of accountability. Let's now look at how to create a standard dossier per model or per use case that would cover all framework at once. The first is having a use case profile. This is where you have a documentation on purpose, the stakeholders, what are the lawful biases that are in place or are there in your system, the classes of risk, and the impact of this risk. That would be your use case profile. Next is having data sheet in place, which should cover provenance, consent, representativeness, and processing aspect. The third is having a model card, which is covering the architecture, the metrics which are included, subgroups, limits, explainability, summary. The fourth part of the dossier should be covering safety and security evaluation aspect, which should cover the biases, the fairness aspect, the robustness, the privacy leakage, the red team, jailbreaking or abuse or misuse cases. That should be completely covered in the safety and security pack. The fifth aspect is operational aspect, wherein the SLOs, the monitoring dashboards, the drift triggers, and the rollback playbook should be in place. The sixth is having an oversight and evidence about it. To provide a human in the loop design, provide training related information and training details, decision rights, and override aspects. The seventh aspect of the dossier should cover conformity and audit logs. Should cover approvals, changes, post market incidents, regulatory communication. This is having one dossier for many frameworks. And once done, this should help you tide over any queries and concerns and provide you a top level view on your model or your use cases. Let's look at governance design that actually works. So let's look at roles and what teeth they have. The first line is the model owner. This is where the performance and the documentation and the remediation aspects are covered. The second line is the independent validator or the risk officer who challenges and has a hard stop mechanism in place. The third is security and privacy. This is the second line again. This is where you have the red team, the DPIA, and the data minimization aspect covered. The third is the internal audit, the third line. Checks for design effectiveness and operating effectiveness. The next is the board and AIRS committee, which provides perspective or defines the risk appetite, agrees on the exceptions, defines the threshold, and provides an oversight on all the incidents in this aspect. What are the different gates? The first is the go, that is Z0, which is where the idea starts. G1, the sandbox, where you test your harm hypothesis, threat models. Then we have the pilot, where you eval the pack completely, check the human oversight plan. At gate 3, you have limited release, and you monitor, where you monitor live, and rollback is to be should be ready at this point if required to. And then the next gate 4 is where you do a broad release. You have evidence of all that is happening, externals, and any disclosures that is required. And then finally, the change and the decommissioning aspect, whether you upgrade it or you do retire it. So these are the various gates of governance. Now, if you look at the maturity model, you have ad hoc level, which is where you have isolated pilots and there is no inventory. From here, you stand up, you have provide what you add is have a stand up inventory and a minimal dossier. The next level is repeatable. The basic characteristics, it has basic policies and some testing. You need to add as a next formal gates and independent validation. The next level is having a defined one. The characteristics is where the AIMS is in place and RMF loop are running. For this, you add addition is post-market monitoring and providing a public transparency aspect. The next level is a managed aspect, which is metric driven and exception governed. What you add is external audits and red team programs. And finally, you have the optimized one. At that level, it is a stage where continuous improvement are on and disclosures are shared. In here, the next step you can add cross organization incident sharing and benchmarking per sector. Let's now look at BFSI specific add-ons. Well, in this, use interpretable models for adverse actions or provide a meaningful explanation that passes the regulatory muster. The next is provide a scenario based harm testing for financial stability, which is AI driven pro cyclical and liquidity cascades. Have a tighter entitlements for prompt weights and features. Prompt output login with retention rules needs to be in place. Next is have a third party model governance, which covers your fintech partners, CRMs, brokers. It requires evaluation evidence and security attestation. The next is to have a you stress your fair lending metrics and customer complaint telemetry and route low confidence decisions to humans. So what good looks like in this? Well, we run AI management system that executes the NIST risk loop for every use case. High risk systems meet EU AI obligations by design. Our validation is independent, security is ISO aligned, and every model shifts with a conformative dossier. We discussed what conformative dossiers look like. And we monitor in production, publish transparency, and can roll back in minutes. So when you say your AI models are good, this is how a good should look like. If all of these are there or you are have already achieved it, you can really say that your models are good. If not, then you need to revisit. These are some of the tests, self-tests that you can make on your own model to check are you really good. So how do we move from paper to practice? First, pick one framework as the spine. Then map the rest into your dossier and gates. We discussed dossier and gates earlier. Build a habit loop like monthly risk reviews, quarterly internal audits, annual board attestation, etc. And treat transparency as a control, not as a press release. Summarizing, frameworks like NIST AI RMF, ISO 42001 aren't paperwork. They are the nervous system of responsible intelligence. They connect intent to executions, values to verifications. When we embed them, risk becomes measurable and accountability visible. In the next chapter, we will put those principles into motion through AI risk lifecycle. The heartbeat of trustworthy AI. Pausing here, I'd like to thank you for the time that you have invested till now for this video. Signing off, this is your host, Savit Vitthal Salian. Namaskar.